Hello there, and welcome to another interesting episode of the interview. Today, I'm so delighted to have Professor Samuel Zalanga that I will be introducing shortly. This promises to be another interesting episode, as always. So I encourage you to actively participate, and you have the privilege to ask questions or to contribute to the discussion as the discussion progresses. So I will go ahead and introduce my guest for today, and from there, we will start this wonderful conversation. Today, I'm privileged to have Dr. Samuel Zalanga, who is a professor of sociology at Bethel University in St. Paul, Minnesota, an institution where he has taught for more than 2 decades. At Bethel University, Professor Zalanga has served as the department chair in the Department of Sociology and Reconciliation Studies. Professor Zalanga was an associate editor for Africa in the Journal of Third World Theologies. He is the current director of research and publications for the Africa Studies and Research Forum. As one will expect of an academic of his repute, Professor Zalanga has numerous academic publications to his credit and has garnered several prestigious awards and recognitions for his academic contributions. I'm so delighted to have you join me today for this interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and start this conversation. I want us to start by talking about your humble background. You know, I've watched several of your interviews, and in some of your writings too, you love to refer to your humble background. And I want us to talk a little bit about that. You were born and raised in a humble background in Bauchi State, Nigeria, something that has shaped the way you see the world and care for the world. So my first question is, how has your humble upbringing shaped your career and the things that you are passionate about?
Okay, thank you very much again for this invitation, and thank you also very much for this question, because it's a question that is very relevant to the way I think about my life. This has been the case since I was young, but as I grew older, I have even been thinking more seriously about this. So, as you rightly pointed out, I was born in Bauchi State and I was raised in Zalanga, and I never hide it to anybody that I come from what in the United States would be considered the underclass. The underclass are people who are not even socioeconomically earning anything worthwhile that they could be ranked as part of the class system. So my parents could only read in Hausa. They went to a Bible school. They were evangelists. But we grew up really poor. There were 9 children in the house. And when my mother visited me here, there were times when I asked her, I said, how did you survive raising 9 children? Sometimes you're not even sure where you're going to get the food to feed them. So I attended an elementary school in Zalanga, which was originally established by the missionaries, then later went to Teachers College, Misau, and then proceeded to Bayero University, Kano. Now, let me be frank, if there was no free tuition to go to the university in Nigeria, and I remember very well, even the food we ate in the cafeteria or dining center at that time was subsidized by the federal government. So what subsidy simply means is that we were not paying the true cost of the meal. So if it were not because of that, I wouldn't be able to go to any university because my parents could not have afford to pay for me. But because of that, I was able to go to the university. And when I went to the university, my original intention was to study law at Bayero University, Kano. And I think a lot of my friends thought that that was what I was going to study. But I remember there's this guy, Professor Umar Tongo, who is late now from somewhere in Adamawa State. He went to school in the United States, but during the summer school, he gave us a lecture in sociology on Karl Marx. And when I heard that Karl Marx And I know many people have different opinions about Karl Marx. People didn't like him. Many people do not like him because he's a communist and this and that. But let me just also say, by way of introduction, that I am somebody who likes intellectual history, and I do not care where ideas come from. I'm going to examine them very carefully, whether they are from China, Brazil, or any place. I would examine them very carefully. And if there's something of value there, I would take it. So I think what fascinated me about Karl Marx was that I grew up as a Christian. I never had people, I know there was talk about charity, but I never had serious discussion about justice.
Mm.
Okay. And I knew that I grew up really, really very poor. And there were quite a lot of poor people around me. And so when I went to Bayero University, kind of my desire was, what could I use my education for to make a difference? I knew that my education was going to improve my status, but that was not the driving force. The driving force was, how could I use my education to make a difference? So after his lecture, I decided to switch. I decided to change my interest from studying law to study sociology. So I became a sociology major. And part of the reason was simply because, to be frank with you, it was fascinating for me to hear that even though Karl Marx was somebody who was European, but I felt like he was aware of people like me existing, in the sense that he said people who are oppressed who are not going to remain oppressed indefinitely. A time is going to come
Mm.
when change is going to take place. So people may disagree with Karl Marx, but for me, this idea that I encountered very early when I went to the university really changed my mind, because this was my passion. I wanted to do something to help people like me. And there are still people like me, or even worse than me, who are still in many parts of Nigeria, especially in the rural areas. They are still there. Okay. They are the people that Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth.
Mm.
Okay. They are the wretched of the earth. So this is what has inspired my education since I went to graduate school, or I went to Bayero University, Kano. And the whole idea was, how could you use education to bring about transformation uh, in a country or in the lives of people? I would tell you that I now feel relatively disappointed, even though personally I would say that, given my background, I feel proud that God has given me the opportunity to achieve what I've achieved. But at the same time, I feel very disappointed, in the sense that the pain of the people of Nigeria or the people of Africa is still there. And I feel very concerned about that. My wish, when I was growing up, I expected that by now Nigeria would be a more developed and inclusive country, or Africa as a whole would be a more developed and inclusive continent. But this is not the case. So there's a way I feel uh, disappointed about that. And sometimes I feel like I'm going to die with that frustration, because life is not just about developing myself or people individually developing themselves, but we have to be concerned about the common good. Thank you.
It's so fascinating that you started by talking about Karl Marx.
Yeah.
I quite agree with you that most times when people are talking about Karl Marx, it's like a case of throwing the baby with the bathing water, right? It's
Mhm.
like everything about him was wrong. I also had almost the same experience when I went for graduate studies at the University of Jos more than 10 years ago. I was studying sociology of religion, many courses there, and we had to study a lot of Karl Marx. And coming from the seminary, I had all these ideas about Karl Marx. I was already, biased or prejudiced about his ideas. But taking time to just read the history and what prompted him to do that. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that he says, but I mean that there are a lot of things that we can learn, especially if not anything. I think for Africans, just like you pointed out, that this concern for the poor, he was very genuinely concerned for the state of the proliterates or the poor, and so I just wanted to say that that kind of resonates with me. Still talking about your background, some people start from a humble background like yours, but when they become privileged in the society, suddenly they start behaving as if they have forgotten where they are coming from. I don't know, generally speaking, what do you think contributes to that type of attitude?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There are several, let me say, there are two ways to approach the issue or to answer the issue or to address the issue. One would be to use Plato.
Hmm.
Plato argues, as you remember, that the human psyche has three different parts, right? You have the appetitive desires, which, for those that are familiar with Christian language, it would be something like desires of the flesh, okay? Something like that. And then you have the soul, and then you have the mind or reason. And the problem we have in the world is that starts with the individual. Plato's argument is that there has to be a balance between these three, and particularly reason would have to be in control. Okay, but when even if you have reason, or the reason should work with the heart or with the soul to be in control. But unfortunately, what happens in most cases is that when the appetitive desires, as you call them, or if you like, for those that are familiar with Christian language, something like desires of the flesh, when they take over, they enslave the heart, they enslave the soul, and they enslave human reason. And I think when you look at what is happening in Nigeria, this is what is really taking place. In other words, what I'm saying is that some people think about there are ethnic conflict, ethnic differences in Nigeria, but the way I see it is like you have to regress back deeper and look at, for instance, the fact that the reason why all these ethnic or whatever conflicts are manifesting on the surface is simply because there's a war that is taking place among Nigerians. And part of the reason is simply because we have many of the institutions that are playing an important role in socializing people to tame or to sublimate these appetitive desires have failed. I'm thinking here of things like the family, the educational system, and even religion. Okay, these institutions are all supposed to contribute in supplementing these instinctual desires, or if you like, when I use instinctual desires, I'm now using the language of Sigmund Freud, because Sigmund Freud said you have the ego, you have the ID, and then you have the super ego. These ID are instinctual desires, and the instinctual desires don't care. They don't have any morality. They just tell us, this is what I want. This is just our body. And then the ego is there to just say, okay, you want this? Let's go. But then super ego, which represents the values and ethics of society or the morality of society, will say, oh, no, 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 no. If you want this, this is what morality or ethics says. This is how you should get it. So in other words, if my body tells me that I want something, the super ego would uh, supplement or would at least be in control and just say, okay, you can get this, but here are proper channels for you to get this. And then it will calm me down and say, okay, I can get this, but it will take either this time or I'll have to go through this process before I can get them. Okay. So unfortunately, all the institutions, how do people learn, for instance, to supplement their instinctual desires? It's through religion, it's through um, education, it's through the family. And I would argue with anybody, and I would say to anybody that if you examine these institutions in Nigeria or in Africa in the past decades, you will find out that they have been disrupted. And because they have been disrupted, you find out that we are individuals, but we are just kind of like people who are operating in a certain respect widely. There's no sense of restraint. There's no sense of boundary or about what is enough or what is really adequate, or the need for balance in terms of how we pursue our goals and how we balance our own goals and the common good in society and all those kind of things. So I think in sociology, there's a term that is used to describe this as anomy. Okay, so there's some kind of anomic situation here, and people would think about the fact that we can improve Nigeria by getting the banks do better, getting this, getting that. Well, I agree. You all need these institutions to function. But the Nigeria's development problem or Africa's development problem is an ethical challenge. It's a moral challenge. Unless we address that, unless the individual is balanced within himself or herself, we are going to have problem. And let me add to that by saying that Sigmund Freud wrote a book titled Civilization and Its Discontent. And interestingly, when you read that book, what he's just saying is that he wrote the book before, I believe it was before the First World War. And just based on his observation prior to that was just that one of the greatest threats to civilization is this war within the individual between the instinctual desires, appetitive desires, and then the soul, and then reason. Because when the appetitive desires take over your soul or your heart, and then it takes over your reason, then that's it. You're there, you can be educated, you can be anything, but all your education now become slave to these appetitive desires. And these appetitive desires have no any sense of morality and ethics. Okay. This is a problem that all human beings experience. So Sigmund Freud argued in this book, Civilization and Its Discontent, that the greatest threat to human civilization is the kind of abrupt or eruption or whatever of these instinctual desires. Things may be going relatively normal, maybe, and then sometimes they will just erupt, and then things will just happen like that. When he wrote the book, people did not take him seriously. European countries by 1900 thought that they are the most civilized part of humanity. Conflict would only happen in places like Africa that are backward, but they themselves are so civilized that they have discovered through enlightenment proper rules and mechanisms for managing human affairs. So there's not going to be anything like fighting or something like that. But those people on the other side who are considered to be at the lower level of evolutionary development or something like that, they are the people they have not figured out what it means to be civilized. They are the people who will encounter these problems of disorder or chaos or whatever. And then in 1914, the First World War broke out. Okay. And when the First World War broke out, the book became a bestseller. Why? Because he said the greatest threat to civilization is these instinctual desires. When they erupt, you will think like somebody is a normal human being, but they are having war within themselves. Okay. And I think when you look at Nigeria, sometimes when I watch TV, like all this channel television and all those other, you see this war taking place just in the way people really communicate themselves. Okay. So that's the way I would think about it. And how did I handle that? When I realized that very, very early, I always pray. I always pray for God to give me humility. Okay. Genuine humility, not transactional humility. What I mean by transactional humility is if I am humble or I respect another person or something like that just because I want something from them, there's nothing special about that. This is just like a transaction in the marketplace. When you go to a store, you're just going there because you want to buy something to take care of yourself. So you're not helping the store owner or something like that. So transactional humility is not what I want. I want genuine humility, that I'm respecting somebody, I'm treating somebody with respect because they are created by God and they have a human dignity. It's not about their religion or their ethnicity or whatever. No, their human dignity is what matters. I also pray that God will give me the spirit of compassion, genuine spirit of compassion. Okay. So, and I think since I've been praying over this for over a very long time, it has become an integral part of who I am. And I think even if I'm in a dream, if I would just behave in a manner that does not show compassion or does not show genuine humility towards another person by recognizing their full humanity or our shared humanity, I think I would feel embarrassed about it. So this is part of what some people would call moral and ethical cultivation. In other words, it's not enough for us to know morality or ethics intellectually. We have to find a way to cultivate it. And it's not something that you do easy. I'm not saying that I'm a perfect human being or something like that. But I think I've been praying on this so much that I think I have internalized it really, really very much. And I think even if I had a dream and in the dream I behave in a manner that doesn't show compassion to another person, I'll feel terribly offended by myself for
Hmm.
doing that. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
Still talking about, this issue of poverty and concern for the poor. You
Mhm.
have lived in the United States for more than 2 decades. Anytime you hear the mention of Africa in the West, the picture that readily comes to mind is poverty. So I want to ask you, is Africa really poor?
Mm, Um, there are, yes, there's material poverty in Africa. And let me begin. I will talk of another kind of poverty, but um, there's definitely poverty in Africa. And one way I can explain this in a manner that people can understand this is to say that many Africans, Christian and Muslims, and sometimes even educated people, just think about. Sometimes there was a time I attended a conference at the University of Ibadan, and people were talking about Pan Africanism, this and that. Some great ideas about how Africa can develop by all the different parts of the continent coming together. So that's really a great idea. But we're living under the hegemony of neoliberal capitalism. Okay. So capitalism has been in existence for quite some time, but the present incarnation of capitalism that we have is called neoliberal capitalism. And without getting into the details, let me just explain something about it that would tie to your question about poverty. You see, both all the religions, dominant religions in the world, will tell you that human beings have dignity, or they are created in the image of God, or this and that. In Christianity, they talk about imago Dei and all those kind of things. Okay, I agree with all that. Okay, but when you look at the logic of how the system really operates on day-to-day basis, and these Christians or Muslims are very quiet about that. There are four ways you can be relevant in a neoliberal global capitalist economy. Okay, one, your human capital. Human capital means your skills. Do you have any knowledge or skills that are relevant in the current global economic system? That's one way you can be relevant. You can be a human being created in the image of God, but if you don't have any skills, you don't have any knowledge, it's going to be considered based on the logic and calculus of this incarnation of the capitalist system. Nobody's going to take care of you. Nobody's going to take you really very seriously. The second way you can be relevant is to have an effective purchasing power. Capitalism relies on consumers very, very much. They take the market really very, very important. Okay. Everybody knows that when you talk about capitalism or the neoliberal incarnation, market is really, really very important. Harvey Cox at Harvard Divinity School wrote a book called The Market as God. So there's a way in which the market has become a parallel God now. I cannot get into that detail, but this is something very important for those who want to really explore, because the market tends to dictate quite a lot of things. So in this market, consumers are very important. If you're a consumer, if you don't have an effective purchasing power, which means it's not just that you demand to consume, but you have the money to back up your demand, you're going to be irrelevant. Nobody's going to take you seriously. Okay. So when I go to a shopping mall and they start greeting me, they are not greeting me because they just respect my humanity. They are greeting me because they think I have money. It will expand their capitalist accumulation. I'm going to spend something. That's why they are respecting me to say, oh, yeah, welcome, or have a nice day, or something like that. Okay. So you see the second. So the third way you can be relevant is if you produce something of value. So for some people, Nigeria was only of value because we produce oil. If we don't produce oil, some people don't even know Nigeria or something like that. Okay. So if you produce something of value in the system to the point where the day you do not produce it, people would begin to look for, okay, so what is happening? Because the system is grounded. Okay. So people will take you seriously. And then fourthly, you can be relevant if you are an entrepreneur. Capitalism, especially the neoliberal incarnation, cannot exist without entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who will see A here, and then they go somewhere and see W or see F somewhere, whatever. But they bring these three things together, and then they come up with Z or something new. Okay, so capitalism emphasizes dynamism, in the area of creativity, in the area of innovation. So you cannot exist in a capitalist system, or capitalist system cannot exist without having people who are entrepreneurs. So if you are not relevant in any one of the four ways, you are considered to be a surplus person. Okay, so these surplus people, they exist, but the system just doesn't care about them. Okay, and I'm sorry to tell you that there are a lot of them in Nigeria. Okay, and to give you an example of what I mean by these surplus people, in other words, when capitalism look at them, capitalism doesn't see like they have any skills that they are going to be that are going to be useful for the system. They don't have any money to spend. If many of our citizens make less than $2 per day, who will go and invest? Who will care and invest very much there? Okay, because you are struggling with $2 per day, that's not really very much. Okay, so when you are not relevant in any one of those four ways, in these four ways, you are considered to be a surplus person. Okay, and to give you an example of how these surplus person are, I remember when the earthquake happened in Haiti, over 200,000 people died. And I was telling my students at that time, I was teaching a course on Africa, and we were discussing this with them. And I told them that, look, did you notice that nothing happened with the Dow Jones in the stock market in New York or whatever, that the market was functioning just normally or whatever? It didn't care that there was over 200,000 people who died. Why? Because even though the Haitian people are human beings created in the image of God, they have dignity, but because in this calculus of this neoliberal capitalist economy, they don't produce very much. They don't have whatever in terms of global calculations of what capitalism is. That's why the system just continue to function as if they don't exist. So when you have these surplus people, 10,000 of them will die before tomorrow, and the capitalist system will just continue functioning because in any case, they are surplus people. To give you an example of poverty now, to come closer, uh, Professor, there's this Nobel laureate who said, for instance, that statistically speaking, it is better to be a cow in Europe than to be a kind of human being in another part of the world. Statistically speaking, it is better to be a cow in Europe than to be another human being in another part of the world. Now, why did he say that? Well, this Nobel laureate said this not because he wants to uh, bring some kind of show some disrespect to people in other parts of the world, but he's arguing that when you are living in this neoliberal capitalist economy, it is money that drives things, and people are kind of evaluated in terms of their financial standing and things like that. So the reason why it is better to be a cow is that under the common agricultural policy in the European Union, every cow is subsidized, I believe, $2.50 per day. Okay, in some parts of the European Union. So if you are a farmer, you have a cow, every day that cow is subsidized $2.50 per day, sometimes even more than that. Okay. And the cow has some relevance because it gets electricity 24 hours, and there are veterinary doctors, right, taking care of it. And then it produces milk and cheese. So it is relevant in the market. But then if I go to some parts of Africa, some parts of Nigeria, some parts of the village, you find some people who are just there. They don't have anything to produce that is relevant. The government doesn't subsidize them. They don't make $2.50 per day. So they don't have any like relevance in that respect, purely. Surely God created them in his image and they have dignity. But the way the system really is now treating them is different. So I'll conclude this by saying that my comment here by saying that later in the 21st century, if the system continues like this, people are going to have more voice as consumers with effective purchasing power than they do as citizens. In other words, you can be a citizen of the United States or of Nigeria or Britain, but if you don't have money to spend, you are going to be just irrelevant. Okay? So you go out, you see people begging, okay, because they don't have anything. And then, like in the United States, somebody would arrive at the airport. They are not American, but if they are here legally, a Rolls Royce can pick them up at the airport, and they can go and stay in one of the most expensive hotels and eat one of the most delicious meals. But they are not American. You see, like in America, we don't discriminate between dollars spent by people who are visitors and people who are Americans. So if you're a citizen, you don't have money to spend. You can stay outside or you go to a home shelter. Okay, but the guy who comes in just visiting, if they have the money, they can go and live in a 5-star hotel. Okay, and then more than that, the other issue is that nowadays, because we want money, even in the United States, if you have a lot of money to invest, they create a faster pathway for you to become a citizen. But if you don't have any money, I think it's going to be very challenging for you. You have to go through a lot of scrutiny or whatever. But if you have a lot of millions of dollars to invest, so essentially in Africa, we definitely have the problem of material poverty. But poverty can be distinguished between absolute and relative. The absolute poverty is when people don't have what to eat. And I think with COVID-19, we have seen more serious expression of this absolute poverty where people just wake up, they don't have anything they want to eat or something like that. And then relative poverty, which is just about competition. And this is also common in Nigeria. Like, I see you dressing very well, but I cannot dress very well. And then I feel like I am nobody or something like that. So I start either having envy towards you, or I start thinking about how can I also get what you have. I start feeling depressed just because, not because I don't have what to eat, where to stay, or whatever. And before you know what is happening, this can create conflict between you and me or whatever, not because you have done anything wrong to me or something like that, but simply because of that kind of comparison that I'm trying to make. But a more serious kind of poverty, and this will be the last comment that I will make about this, is called the poverty of perception. I will call it the poverty of perception. And this poverty of perception is the capacity for us to be able to perceive reality as it is and deal with it. So when you look at the problem, say in Nigeria, for instance, the poverty of perception to me simply means like there are a lot of people who should normally come together and be working together to solve our problems, but they cannot perceive that. They continue to say, I am this, I am from this ethnic group, I am from that ethnic group, or this and that, or this religious group, or what, and this and that, okay? But in reality, poverty doesn't care about all those kind of things. It's a material condition, social and material condition. If you find yourself in that condition, you're going to suffer the consequences. So you look at 60 years or close to 60 years or 60 years after independence in Nigeria, we're still struggling with some issues that you feel we should have been able to resolve them. And part of it has to do with the fact that we have not achieved this level of we have this problem of poverty of perception. The problem is there, but we have refused or failed to perceive it appropriately, or even if people have perceived it, they have refused to acknowledge it. Okay, so this is why you see us killing each other, different ethnic groups, or based on religion or ethnic groups or whatever. I don't know what sort of satisfaction people gain out of that, but if you look at conflict in Guatemala, Northern Ireland, Algeria, these people all fought themselves. Sri Lanka, they will fight all these wars or whatever, and then at the end of the day, they will realize that it's not going to take them anywhere unless they put down their arms and work together to build the common good so that everybody can thrive in it.
You spoke about capitalism and in relation to the issue of poverty. There is no denying the fact that Africa is actually blessed, right? We are blessed with mineral resources and all kinds of things. So will you say that the poverty that we see in Africa is as a result of refusing to embrace capitalism, as it were? Or in other words, will you say that Africa, and specifically Nigeria, will be better off if we embrace capitalism as an economic system?
Okay, so This is a very interesting point because when you look at the United States, for instance, or even Western nations, there's a book that was written by this guy called Capital in the 21st uh, Century by Thomas Piketty. He's a French guy. And it's a huge book. When you read it, you see very clearly that most of the prosperity of capitalism that emerged in the Western world took place after the Second World War. But it was not about capitalism per se. It is because also of the emergence of social movements. And these are called progressive social movements. Progressive social movements are movements like labor unions and things like that, or people, women's movements, uh, different kinds of social movements that came together and push to renegotiate the nature of the state and the nature of the society and the nature of the distribution of resources. Okay? So capitalism in and of itself doesn't have any sense of morality. No.
Mm, mm,
In and of itself, it doesn't have any sense of morality. Like, if anybody assumes that capitalism is just there, okay, let me give you one example in the United States, for instance. We have serious problem of employment in the United States compared to the past, okay? But if you look at Wall Street, which evaluates, this is where trading takes place and then corporations are evaluated. I challenge anybody who is listening to this to go and check and see whether when Wall Street is evaluating a corporation in the United States or anywhere in the world, they do that by asking, okay, how many jobs have they created for the people in their country? How many jobs have they kept within that country in order to improve the welfare of the workers or the citizens or something like that? No, that's not how they calculate uh, the success of a corporation. The way they do that is just they calculate the return on the dollar. Like if you invest this amount of dollars or you invest $1 in this corporation, what would be the rate of return for you on that dollar? So now when the corporation is knows that it is evaluated this way, what they're going to do is they will look for the most efficient way to get a higher return on the dollar. Because if they get a higher return on the dollar, that is going to increase the value of their share because people will say, if you really buy a share in this corporation, you'll get a higher return. And part of what it means sometimes to get this higher return, actually, when you look at sometimes business news, when a corporation lays off a lot of workers, the values of their shares go up. Okay, the values of their shares go up. So corporations have tried to cope with that by moving jobs to developing countries where the cost of labor is very cheap and there's not much regulation. Sometimes they have used automation. Automation simply means like you have 100 workers working in a corporation like in the United States. They would work very hard and they're hard workers. I've reviewed a lot of documentary films to affirm that. They're very hardworking people, but when they work very hard, they generate a lot of profit for the corporation. The corporation will take maybe 15% of the profit and invest it on technology that will automate production. In other words, the technology will replace human beings. So maybe after they do that, maybe 5 workers or 10 workers lose their job because they have worked themselves out. They have generated a lot of profit for the company, and the company is pursuing efficiency. There's nothing illegal about this. This is just part of the logic of the system. So the company invests on this technology for the pursuit of efficiency, but that investment and pursuit of efficiency means some workers are going to lose their job because they are going to be let off. Okay. So when they are let off, it is possible some of them may get something equal like that, like their previous position. But some of them, even if they get a job, their payment is going to be lower than what they were earning before, which can introduce some sense of frustration and things like that. Okay. And then, so as it continues, the rate of the higher profit that will be generated by using machines for production instead of human beings is not going to go to the workers or to the ordinary citizens. It is going to go to the owners of the business or the shareholders. Now, you can argue that these shareholders or corporations pay taxes. Well, go and check the history, and you're going to find out that even in a country like the United States, the rich are very powerful. They are able to lobby the U.S. Congress, and so they get a higher tax they get higher tax cut. Actually, there was a time I saw uh, one of the successful business men in the United States from Omaha, Nebraska, who, for instance, said that the rate of tax he was paying was less than the rate of tax that the woman working as his secretary or something like that was paying. What does that mean? What that simply means is that in terms of the absolute amount of money he pays as taxes, he pays more than the woman. But when you look at the amount of wealth he has, and then you ask yourself what percentage of his wealth is he paying as taxes, or what percentage of his earnings is he paying as taxes, you find out that the percentage is very low compared to that woman, because that woman is, when she is paid, the money has to be reported to the Internal Revenue Service, and then they will just force her to pay the taxes that she's supposed to really pay. So for those who say that capitalism, the reason why the Western world has developed is just because of capitalism, I think that's kind of a lack of understanding of the true history of the Western world, because what really shaped the Western world is not just capitalist development, but the emergence of progressive social movements. These progressive social movements, they fight to create welfare policies. They fight for the rights of human beings, the rights of workers, the rights of women, all sorts of policies that are going to improve the welfare of people. And by the way, when they did this, there was a lot of resistance on the part of the rich. They resisted that. It was just the sheer level of organization and pressure on the state. So for those who assume that by just kind of like um, promoting capitalism in the in Nigeria or in Africa, this is going to lead to success or whatever, I don't think they have a good understanding of what capitalism is. Capitalism will do that if there's a balance. Okay, and there's this guy called Reinhold Niebuhr who argues that if you want justice in any society, there has to be balance of power. If there's no balance of power, there's not going to be justice. And you notice in the United States, for instance, as we approach 2000 or the end of the 20th century, because many of these movement or progressive social movements that I mentioned to you have declined, you notice that the level of social inequality started widening in the United States, started widening, because capitalism in and of itself, it doesn't have any sense of morality. It can be productive, but it's not. And there are some Christians who believe that um, capitalism is an integral part of God's plan for the redemption of humanity. Let me repeat again, that capitalism is an integral part of God's plan for the redemption of humanity. So if you translate it in layperson's language, for those that are listening to this and they are Christian, what these people are saying is that when Jesus died on the cross, he was dying for free market, part of it, because if his death was for the redemption of humanity, and part of this capitalism is an integral part of,
Yeah,
So
doesn't that have any connection with Max Weber's Protestant ethics? Protestant ethics.
okay, this is a very interesting because my doctoral dissertation was shaped a lot by the work of Max Weber. Okay. So sometimes when I work with students, I compare Max Weber with Friedrich Nietzsche. So he's another German.
Also.
Yeah. So I tell them that, okay, so Friedrich Nietzsche is the university professor who wears jeans and t-shirts, and he doesn't care what you feel. He will just tell you what he thinks. Okay. And just go away. If you like, you can go to hell. he just tells you, okay? And then Max Weber will tell you the same thing, but he dressed in suit and necktie. And he's very diplomatic. Right. Okay, he's very diplomatic. So he tells you these things, and you take him very seriously. But when you go back home and reflect, you say, actually, he's just saying what Nietzsche said, but he's just saying it in a diplomatic way. Okay, so here is what Weber said. For instance, and Weber is interesting because he's not Karl Marx. I always tell my students in the United States that many Americans are afraid of Karl Marx. Why? because he's a communist. He promoted ideas of socialism, communism, or whatever. And we do not want communism or socialism, so we're afraid of him. We should just discard him. So we don't want to be close to him because he will get us into trouble. Okay? So in essence, Marx is saying that we're going to be in trouble because capitalism is going to collapse, right? Because there's going to be a revolution or whatever. Well, here is how Weber differs from him. And I think I always tell students that Americans should feel more afraid of Weber than they should feel afraid of Karl Marx. Why? Because Max Weber, based on this, one of those books, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, most people don't read it in detail. That's why they think like it's a celebration of capitalism. Because when Weber wrote about capitalism, he said the future of humanity in the Western world is going to be an iron cage, not a Garden of Eden. Okay. Okay. But most people, like in the United States, when they hear the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, yeah, we're a Protestant country. Or wait. Go and read him very carefully. Okay. He said, the future of humanity in this system is not going to be a Garden of Eden as you're expecting. This kind of utopian happiness or whatever is going to be an iron cage. And there are reasons why Weber says that. Weber was concerned about what he calls the process of rationalization. And this process of rationalization, which means the pursuit of efficiency. Okay? So let me give you an example of how this process of rationalization has no end and it can become really very dangerous. There are drive-through churches in the United States where, because of efficiency, okay, you can just, like McDonald's, you can just go to the window, you press a button, and then they pray for you. You just drive, you continue your journey. Okay. Okay. And then, if you're going to, prayer in every religion requires quite a lot of dedication or concentration and focus if you are going to engage in serious prayer. Okay. So, but we live in a very fast-paced world. People don't have the time to do that. So you have all these recorded prayers where you can buy. If you want to sleep, you just press the button and then you close your eyes. The prayer is set for you. Very efficiency. Okay. And then one day I was driving here, and then I had a program on the public radio where they said that scientists have conducted research and they found out that true prayer penetrates human body when people are really engaged in serious prayer. Okay. Which is fine, which is also a support for religion, which says that when people are truly, truly involved in prayer, serious prayer, there's a way it shows, because they do this where they make people pray, and then they go somewhere, and then all the picture of their body is being seen through the machine or whatever. So they said that, okay? So that shows that prayer is very important. But because capitalism is interested in the pursuit of efficiency and how to make money out of that, what did they say? They said, okay, now some pharmaceutical companies are interested in knowing the neurological basis through which prayer penetrates the human body. Because when they are able to know that, they would develop a drug that is going to replace prayer. Okay. So Max Weber, I really like him, but he's scary when you read him, because when he understands the efficiency of capitalism. So there's no debate. Him and Karl Marx both agree on the efficiency of capitalism. Okay. But the point I'm just trying to say here is that for those who are afraid of Karl Marx and listening to this, maybe you should feel more afraid of Max Weber, because Max Weber said, we are going to be in trouble as a society because capitalism is going to be so successful. And this is exactly what every society is trying to do. They want to have successful capitalism. Well, that's where Max Weber becomes relevant to you or to the country, because he says we are going to be in trouble because capitalism is going to be very successful. If capitalism becomes successful, everything becomes commodified. Okay? We becomes like a commodity. Okay? Like, surrogate motherhood. There's a way in the United States today where they can they industrialize the body of a woman. They inject her, and in 1 month she can produce 30 eggs. Okay. And then they go to the lab and just remove all those eggs. Okay. And then so if they want to fertilize it, then they fertilize it. Then they look around the world, where can we rent a womb that is very cheap? A healthy womb that is very cheap. Okay. And so they look for a country where there's a woman who is willing to rent her womb. They go and pay her certain amounts of money, and then she stays like in a dormitory. She gives birth to this baby, and they take it away from her, and then she uses the money with her husband to go and build a house. How about that? Okay. So there's no end to end this process of rationalization. If you're talking about, say, this process of rationalization, if you're a religious person, if you look at some techniques of preaching or persuasion, or combining with persuasion, you don't have to be teaching the truth before you can persuade people if you know the skills. Okay, somebody can have something that is not true, but if they know the techniques of persuasion or whatever, amazingly they are able to do that. And you see that even in US politics, where some politicians are able to say certain things that are false or that are not correct, but because of certain things, they are able to get away with it or something like that. So there are efficient ways of doing all these things. And so capitalism is very productive. Nobody doubts that. But the idea that it is going to lead to this Garden of Eden, Weber has long said, no, 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 no. Capitalism is going to lead us to an iron cage.
So somebody listening to this may say, while you seem to be like against capitalism and in support of socialism, how will you respond to that?
No, 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 no. The issue is balance.
Okay.
I already mentioned, if the person really understands what I'm saying, I don't think you're going to be able to be successful with communism or socialism. The issue is balance. Remember that in the United States, for instance, the ideal period in this country, even during that period there was some serious challenge, is the post-war period. They call it post-war prosperity. There was prosperity after the Second World War, but that prosperity was not socialism. Okay, it was not communism, but it was that period where there was a balance of power. Okay, because here we're talking about distributive justice. Distributive justice doesn't mean socialism, like everybody's going to get. Even socialism, we're not able to get everything to everybody equally. So we're not talking about, I don't believe you can create a society where everybody is equal. Okay, in the sense that you can talk about formal equality. By the way, there are 5 different types of equality, which is another separate topic. So when we use equality, I don't want people to, you have ontological equality, formal equality, equality of opportunity, equality of condition, and equality of outcome. So we don't have the time to get into that. But the point I'm just trying to make is that if somebody is an American and they're listening to this, one of the best periods, if you think of in terms of how, even though I know Black people were still segregated at that time or whatever, but the post-war period is considered the era of prosperity. Okay. But if you check why this was the case, you find out that there was a relative balance of power between capital and labor. Okay. But nowadays, labor has lost. It is capital that is driving everything. Okay. So what we need is just balance. And if anybody is really concerned about what I'm really saying, let him understand. There's a book written by Charles Murray. Charles Murray is a libertarian, and they are very tolerant of inequality. But that book, titled Coming Apart, is just an examination of inequality within whites in America. And if you read that book and you have seen what happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, you wouldn't be surprised, because he wrote that book in 2012, but it was like a warning, because he was saying that this widening inequality between within the white community is really creating a sense of not only frustration, but a sense of people feeling really, really very displaced. There's another author, Ali Hochschild, who wrote a book about that, where she described the white working class as strangers in their own land. What does she mean by that? These are people who believe in hard work, and they believe that through hard work they can pursue the American dream. But they now woke up in America and found out that it doesn't matter even if you're willing to work and you're willing to work very hard, the job may not be available. And the way the logic of the system, the distributive justice system, is now skewed in favor of capital rather than labor. So this is what I'm trying to really emphasize. It's not about creating socialism, because if you understand justice from the point of view of power, it doesn't matter whether you're communist or um, whether you're communist or whatever. Actually, if you read Max Weber very carefully, Max Weber to me was a person who persuaded me that socialism or communism per se, the way people are thinking about it, will not be a solution, because his critique of Karl Marx was that Marx thought that the problem of inequality in modern capitalist society was simply because of capitalism. But then Weber said there's also another dimension to it, which is more difficult to challenge, which is the fact that if you are going to run a modern society, complex society, where you have all these bureaucracies, right, with hierarchy, a bureaucracy has hierarchy, and you are not going to be able to run a modern society without some people having more power than others. So that's where inequality begins, because Robert Michels, in his book, The Political Parties, he wrote about how once you have these elites at the top of the bureaucracy in charge, gradually they have more power, they have more information, and because they have more power and information, they use it to their own advantage to control the organization, and that's where inequality then begins to, yeah. So the issue is a very complex one, but I don't want people to just dismiss this concern that I have or I'm raising about inequality on grounds that, oh, it sounds, I know in the United States people think that, oh, this sounds like socialism or whatever. What happened in Washington, D.C. on January 6th is very unusual, very, very unusual. It's not something you expect even in a third world country, that people would go and invade the capital like that. And there is a reason for that. And inequality, I have taught a course on inequality, and if people don't understand inequality, actually, Paul Samuelson, an economist, quoted Albert Einstein. He said, don't believe an idea simply because it is elegantly stated. And what is the relevance of that to this discussion? In other words, you talk about all this freedom or whatever, allow the market to compete freely. Yeah, it sounds really nice. But even if the market is competing freely, and this is what economics textbooks say, if there's widening inequality in society, as we're witnessing in the United States, there are consequences, there are social consequences. And this is what is happening today in the United States, and including Nigeria too, including northern Nigeria. All these killings, yeah.
And talking about northern Nigeria, that was the next thing I wanted us to talk about. You were born and raised in Bauchi, which is part of northern Nigeria. You did your undergraduate studies at Bayero University in Kano, which is also in northern Nigeria, and later you did your master's at the University of Jos, which technically, to some extent, is referred to the north. So my point is that you are not only from the north, but you are someone who is well exposed to the northern part of Nigeria. So the first question is, the northern part of Nigeria is the poorest in the country, and there is no denying that fact. From your observations and studies, what factors do you think contribute to the high rate of poverty that is noticeable in northern Nigeria?
This is really quite interesting, and I don't think we have the time to really explore this in detail. But for the listener, I just want them to know that when I came to do my doctorate in the United States, initially, I wanted to write my doctoral dissertation on using Paulo Freire's approach to education called conscientization. There's a book he wrote called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So I wanted to use the logic in that book to see how can you educate the ordinary masses of Nigeria or whatever to understand, Malam Aminu Kano in Kano has always championed the goals of the Talakawas, right? The ordinary people of northern Nigeria. So, but I took a course on comparative Asian development when I was in graduate school. And interestingly, I found out that the Asian countries that were colonized are doing far better than many African countries, even though they were also colonized. So I decided to do my doctoral dissertation comparing Malaysia and Nigeria. And I remember somebody also telling me that even though my doctoral dissertation compared Nigeria and Malaysia, but because I am from the northern part of Nigeria and I am concerned about the real poverty that I saw in northern Nigeria and that I grew up experiencing myself, a lot of my references or whatever was actually to the situation in northern Nigeria. I was very, very concerned really about that. So, in this respect, what are the causes of poverty in northern Nigeria, or why is it that northern Nigeria is the most poor, or something like that? Well, part of the reason has to do with the fact that um, there are quite a lot of reasons, but there are a lot of things like cultural reasons for that. There are political reasons for that. But the main explanation, if you like, is just that, for one, if you really want to modernize, and I've said this to many people in Nigeria, for instance, when I was there, I'll say Nigerians have the right to choose whether they want to become part of the modern world or not. They have the option of making that decision, but they cannot decide if they decide they want to become part of the modern world, then they have to ask themselves what are the minimum requirements they need in order to function effectively in that modern world. In other words, I don't care which part of the world you come from. Okay, I've studied modernity, and I'm not saying that modernity is perfect or anything like that. But Nigerians, I tell them that you have the right to go back to you have the right to go back to the first, maybe the past 2000 years or something of your heritage or whatever. That's fine. You have the freedom to do that if you decide you want to do that. But my only warning is that if you decide to be part of the modern world, you have to ask yourself, what are the minimum requirements? And I don't think the northern, I don't think the northern Nigerian leaders or elites have taken that really very seriously. So what happened is that since Nigeria became independent, the elites wanted to keep the system in a more aristocratic way. And what that simply means is that they do not want ordinary people to move up. And for quite some time, they thought they were going to be able to keep that system the way it is. And part of the reason why they thought they would do that is simply they use the argument of tradition and things like that. I grew up in the North, okay? In the North, people would use concepts or things like tradition means al-ada and things like that. So they wanted to keep, or religion, okay? And by the way, let me say this, whether you are a Christian or a Muslim, I want to say this very, very clear that religion is an instrument of change and for justice, just as it is an instrument of oppression. Let me repeat again. Religion can be an instrument of change and justice, but it can also be an instrument of oppression. This is true of all religions: Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, or Buddhism. Okay, all religions can be used to oppress other human beings. And I think Nigerians are living under this illusion that simply because they are Muslims or they are Christians, automatically that is just going to be, these religions are just something that will just liberate human beings. No, I challenge anybody who has studied these two religions very seriously, they will arrive at the conclusion that those two religions have been used to oppress, to dehumanize other human beings, just as in some cases they have been used to liberate human beings. So I remember there was a time I was in Federal University, Gashua. I made a presentation and the person was just trying to attack me, thinking that I am from the United States. And then I quoted Othman Danfodio, who led the Sokoto Jihad in 1804. Othman Danfodio led this Islamic reformist jihad, but towards the end of his life, he made this statement. He said, "A kingdom can survive unbelief, but it cannot survive injustice." Let me repeat again. Okay, this is a guy who led a whole religious reform movement. Okay, but he said a kingdom can survive unbelief, but it cannot survive injustice. And when I read it, I was so impressed. You don't have to be a Muslim. You don't have to agree with all the things that happen or whatever. But you know, the Reformation too in Europe, a lot of things happen that are not things that people would be happy about. But the point is that he saw the way how even after the jihad, corruption, okay, took over in the north. Corruption took over in the north. And he was honest to admit that. I saw some things he wrote where you could just see that he was just so depressed about the way corruption has resumed, or the way people in the new government after the jihad were using the position to just enrich themselves. So there was a kind of like hierarchy that was existing in the north. And I think in the name of tradition, in the name of religion, people expected that they will just keep the system the way it is in the north. Women are going to be kept where they are. If you are a minority person, you are not a Hausa Fulani person, there is a certain status you have. If you are a Hausa or Fulani, but you are at the bottom of the society, you're supposed to be where you are. The way forward is through patron-client relationship, which means you have to be connected to somebody at the top. If you don't have anybody at the top, then you cannot move forward. So that's fine. For quite some time, it looks like things were stable in Nigeria or whatever. But the problem Northern Nigeria ran into is that the world is changing. And the world is changing in so many ways. Not only are people receiving education, and sometimes you get people who are from ordinary background, but because of their education, they have become something. But more importantly, people are listening to the news. Now they have access to what is happening in other parts of the world, and they can use that information to interrogate their own conditions. And so the North refused to deal with all the necessary things that are needed to modernize a society, because they thought doing that will bring disruption. It will disrupt their culture, their heritage, or whatever. But it has reached a point now that the status quo is no more feasible. Okay, so you go to Zamfara, you find these things really happening. And I would expect that I am younger than many of these northern elites. They should have known this. They should have seen this, that they come in, that they cannot just keep the system the way it is forever, because the world is changing. Things are changing, and people are just frustrated. And that's why we have this. And yeah, this is not, Nigeria is not the first country where this is really happening. By the way, let me just say this. There was a time I was teaching this course I teach in Guatemala, Central America. And in the economic textbook that I'm using, they were comparing the gap between human development, economic growth or whatever, and human development. Okay, because sometimes you can get an economy or a society that economically growing, but the quality of life or living of the people, of the majority of people in that society, is not reflecting that economic growth, which means most of the economic growth is just benefiting a small percentage of people at the top of the society, which is which is happening in Nigeria, but particularly in the north. And amazingly, they say that this area where Boko Haram started, around the Bono area, is one of the areas in the whole world that has one of the lowest human development indicators. Okay, that was before Boko Haram, so I was not surprised when Boko Haram really started. So to conclude what I'm saying in this part with regard to poverty in northern Nigeria, there's nothing that says northerners have to be inherently poor. There's nothing that says northerners are less intelligent or are less capable of doing things. The problem is that northerners want to live in the modern world, but they have never bothered to ask themselves what are the minimum requirements for effective participation and living in this modern world. We have to educate our women. You can't say because a woman is a Muslim woman, she cannot be educated. If the North do not educate their women, then it is going to affect the long-term development of the IQ of children in the North. Why do I say that? Because women play a very important role during the process of socialization in shaping the future of young people. And so if you have other parts of Nigeria where most of their women are educated and they have children, it will have an impact in the way these children are raised compared to northern Nigeria, where a woman might be like, when I was teaching in elementary school before I went to the university, I saw a lot of these young women who are in rural northern Nigeria who have the potential to study and become successful, but by the time they don't sometimes even allow them to finish elementary school. They would say they want to get them married or something like that. I remember there was a time I wrote a letter to my supervisor telling him that if these children are going to be taken out of school, they are not going to be allowed to finish elementary school, or they are all going to get married, they're not going to go to secondary school. I said they may want to consider changing the curriculum of primary education so that they start teaching them maybe how to raise children or in a more educational way. Because the curriculum of primary schools in Nigeria, when I taught, was geared towards preparing somebody for secondary school. The assumption was that the person is going to go to secondary school, but these young women are not ending up going to secondary school. So there are religious factors, there are cultural factors, all this, and Nigeria is not unique, or northern Nigeria is not unique in this respect. The only thing is just that the power elites, the hierarchy in the region, has been able to hold on to the status quo for quite some time, and now we are paying a huge price for that.
Still talking about northern Nigeria. Northern Nigeria has produced leaders in the country. If you're talking about the military heads of state and also civilian presidents, more than any region in the country.
Mm-hmm.
How does one explain the seeming backwardness of the North in the country, in spite of these leadership privileges, so to speak, that the region has enjoyed?
Okay, I think it goes back to the point I just finished trying to make, because it's a very broad argument. So we have the leaders, but the leaders just kind of is a small elite group. Okay, there was never an attempt by any of the Nigerian leaders to seriously engage ordinary citizens to be effectively part of development. And part of the reason why this has not happened is because there's this kind of distinction, very clear hierarchy in the North. Okay. So if you mobilize ordinary people, so many ordinary people to be part of development, some people feel in the North it is going to be a threat to the distinctive power of the elites who are up there, who are supposed to be almost like worship because of the way they are treated or something like that, right? So, so because of that, even though we have produced so many leaders, but this conversation, even if you are educated in the North, unless you are affiliated to any of these influential people, and I think this is still something that happens. You can look at all the people who are in the cabinet. Say, for instance, now in Nigeria, you're going to find out that if you check the history, you're going to find out that there are people who came there either through some patron-client relationship, like the president, when campaigning in one state, he has some people who are working for him, and then now he has won the elections, so he has to ask them, who do you want, who should I appoint from, or whatever, or something like that. So it's very, very rare, or somebody who knows him, or the president knows somebody, and then the person suggested this person, whatever. So it's about connections. It's very, very hard to say that in Nigeria there's this kind of relatively level playing field where somebody as Mala Aminu Kano said, somebody who is nobody can rise to become somebody. It's really very, very difficult. So, and part of the reason why they are afraid of involving the masses is that if you empower the masses, the history is going to be open-ended. And what I mean by it is going to be open-ended is that you can't, as an elite, sit down there and just say, because you're the emir or because you're the president, this and that, just that's it. The masses can be very innovative, and I don't mean violence or anything like that. Okay, they can push politics in one direction or the other, and the northern Nigerian elites, or even elites in other parts of the country, do not want that. But the difference is that the elites, the ordinary citizens in other parts of Nigeria, are relatively more organized and more educated than the ones in northern Nigeria. And so for that reason, even though we have produced many presidents, but these are just a small group of people who have kept things just among themselves, a small class of people out there. They never allowed mass participation of citizens so that they can have a lot of say. There's one scholar who said that be very careful, because we kept many of the ordinary citizens in northern Nigeria poor. Because when people are poor, they will always be thinking about survival. Okay? But be careful. When the peasant farmer's belly is full, when the peasant farmer's belly is full, he can begin to ask you a lot of questions. He can cause you, some people will say, a lot of troubles. But I remember also when I was writing my dissertation, I think there was this emir. I don't know whether it was of that of Katsina or one of those northern states. I was very surprised. It was a colonial document where he was cited, where he was saying that he was asked to explain why was the North backward. Okay. And he was saying that he was an emir, and I was very surprised at his insight. And he came up with 3 reasons at that time. You say one is because of tradition, which I mentioned much earlier, where people refuse to change because they say this is our tradition and all those kind of things. And I'm not saying that tradition doesn't have any value, but no tradition can survive without adapting itself. Okay, I've come across that in my studies. Now, one way you can make a tradition survive is to continue to adapt it. But if you just remain stagnant, the world is going to move ahead and you're going to remain backward. So tradition is one of those arguments that have been used to push against modernizing the North. And then secondly, he said religion, which is true. Western education was perceived as Christian. And so the thing that was emphasized was just like traditional Islamic education. Now, again, when you travel around the world, you find out that in Malaysia, for instance, they have an international Islamic university. And when I was there to do my research, if you see the conversation going on in the newspapers or presentations by scholars there, it's really, really very impressive. Okay. So when I say the issue is not, I don't have any problem with having Islamic school in northern Nigeria if it understands the complexity like that international Islamic university. Okay. But you can't shield yourself from the realities in the modern world. So, but anyway, religion is not just, in this case, it is not just Islam, but Christianity too can be an obstacle to modernization. But the only thing is that Western education in Nigeria has some history connected to Christianity, so it's a little bit different. But the third argument the guy, the emir made was what surprised me. He said the third reason why there's lack of progress in the North, and I have this source of information because it was something that I came across in research. He said, for the typical Northerner, average Northerner, if his belly is full and he gets his wife on the bed, Alhamdulillah. This and once I read that,
can we call that mediocrity or what is that?
Well, actually, this is not something unique to northern Nigeria because Oscar Lewis wrote something about the culture of poverty. I think it was in Mexico he did that research. The culture of poverty, things within the culture that can keep somebody down. And then there's this book that was written about Italy, southern Italy, titled "The Moral Basis of a Backward Society." The moral basis, that's the title of the book. If you read it, it's quite interesting. It's just to see the day-to-day interaction of people in the society, which they do it in good faith, but it just seems like nobody is thinking about this kind of great vision or whatever. The issue is just like, yeah, you do this. This is just a small community, and this is just it. There's no deep thinking about transformation and things like that. So in this respect, it's not surprising. Yeah, you have your wife in the village, right? You get she cooks your food, you go on farm, you cook food, you have your children, you raise them. So your belly is full, you go and sleep. Tomorrow you face life, that's just it. There's nothing more. That's not actually unique to northern Nigeria. But what surprised me is, because as I told you, like in southern Italy, there's this book, The Moral Basis of a Backward Society. It was written about Italy, not northern Nigeria. And then Oscar Lewis' study of Mexico. The question is, once we realize this, as I said much earlier, northerners or any Nigerians or Africans would have to decide, do they want to modernize or not? If they don't want to modernize, they can go back to 5,000 years of their culture. That's fine. It's their choice, okay? But my point is, if they really decide that they are going to be part of this modern world, then they have to ask themselves, what are the minimum requirements? And I think this is what Malaysia did. And I chose Malaysia simply because for my comparative study when I did my doctorate, because I am from northern Nigeria and I was concerned about the relative backwardness of my region. Okay. So I look for a country that has predominant Islamic culture or influence. I wanted to see how that country has made progress. Okay. That country has developed to a point where nobody can deny Malaysia that they have made significant progress. Nobody will say that they don't have challenges, but definitely Malaysia has made progress. So my point is, how is it that this predominantly Islamic country was able to make progress, and what can Nigeria, particularly given the fact that northern Nigeria is more backward than other regions of Nigeria, learn from that experience?
A follow-up question to that is, do you think that talking about the elites, the northern elites, do you think that the northern political elites in Nigeria have hijacked the leadership of the country? And if so, do you see this as detrimental?
You mean the elites at the top, right?
Yes, the political elites in the north.
Okay, I think this is the case. I truly believe that actually there are some poems that were written about in support of northern elites by, is it Saadu Zungur or something like that, that I came across when I was writing my dissertation. We really started at a very conservative point, because you see in some of the poems people saying that there's nothing like democracy. So the question of people's power is nothing. So you're talking about absolutist rulers who are destined to rule by God or whatever, and things like that. So there's that. That's where we really started. But as regard to the dominance of the elites in power, you see, in my scholarship, I have been very interested in the movement of Europe from from the medieval period to the modern period, because as a development studies scholar, I am interested in what can African countries learn from the experience of European countries. I do not mean that we are to replicate 100% or replicate whatever they did. But the idea is that I can look at your life. I don't have to exactly replicate what you did, but I can learn something from that. Okay, I can learn something and say, okay, he did it this way or she did it this way, and if I want to succeed, these are my options or something like that. Okay, so when you look at what happened in Europe, this whole question of elite dominance is not something unique to northern Nigeria. There's a book written by Charles Tilly, Coercion, Capital, and State. I think that's the title of the book, by Charles Tilly. And when you see it, it's about the emergence of the modern state. The modern state emerged in Europe through power struggle. Okay, the elites wanted certain things, but they could not get it from the citizens. So the citizens could not get it just like that from the citizens. The citizens insisted that if you want us to give you this, you have to do this for us. So if you like, there's some kind of balance of power there. So what is happening in northern Nigeria is just that there has not been any kind of broad-based social movement that is going to challenge this elite power. And there's no place in human history where this kind of change, broad-based changes have taken place without some kind of challenge. And when I say challenge, I don't mean violence or whatever, but organized either resistance or pressure. Pressure simply means for the elite to realize that in order for them to live their elite status, remember that there is no elite in society. There is not going to be any elite in society without masses. So the existence of elite presupposes the existence of masses. So what that simply means is that the masses should understand that they have power. And that power is to say that they are willing to recognize their leaders, but if their leaders want the recognition of the masses, the leaders must do certain things that please the masses or improve the social status of the masses. But part of the problem also in northern Nigeria is religion, predestination. You know, I know it is not only in Islam, but even in Christianity, people talk about predestination. But when people just take predestination for granted, they don't do anything. They just sit down there and just say that whatever God's predestined is going to happen is going to happen. So they don't have to do anything about it. But essentially, what is happening in the North, the dominance of the elites, which you pointed out is true. But my point is just that it is not only in northern Nigeria. If you look at the history of Europe during the medieval period, the elite had that kind of dominance. The reason why things changed was there was a systematic and organized resistance. Even here in the United States, this is the same point I made in the period after the Second World War, that when people talk about a prosperous America, post-war prosperity, Thomas Piketty in his book, Capitalism, Capital in the 21st Century, made this very clear that what created this good society after the Second World War, which was capitalist, was not just capitalism per se, but the balance of power, because labor was very strong. And there are other organized movements, as I said, like the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and all those kind of social movements that force the elites to kind of change certain things to create a more broad-based and more inclusive society. I think for the average Talaka or the masses in northern Nigeria, I don't know whether I can say this thing in Hausa, this sentence in Hausa, and then I will explain it, what it means in English. So we always laugh with my friend when we are thinking about Nigeria, and I would joke with him by saying, Allah baku musamu. Okay. So Allah baku musamu means may God give you so that we'll get something. In other words, I've defined myself on the other side. I'm waiting for you up there. Okay, for God to give you, okay, something so that I'll get it. So
he won't give it to me directly.
Yeah, he don't give me. You see, that's the point. And when you believe that, there's a way we can change it. I don't think there's anything that somebody can justify and say this is it. Islam doesn't stop you. You read different manifestations of Islam in different parts of the world. The Prime Minister of Malaysia, who has influenced me a lot when I did my research, and he influenced my scholarship. He makes me proud as somebody from the third world. That is Mahathir Mohamad. Okay, yeah, because he doesn't believe this kind of whatever language of you just sit down there, you're a victim, you're passive, you cannot do something with yourself. No, there are a lot of things we can do to organize ourselves to make a difference. But when people have this kind of mentality, it's going to be difficult. Let me give you one example of how I've dealt with that using Paulo Freire's approach. When I was in jail, I like engaging ordinary people in conversation. So I got this guy selling cola, and I met him, and I said, in Hausa language, Megoro, I called him Megoro. I said, can you choose a cola nut that you can sell to me? I will buy it from you. But choose a cola nut that when I buy it and eat it, my status in this world is going to be elevated. Okay. Because of this cola nut. It's an interesting conversation. So when I asked the question, I remember people looking and they are just smiling or whatever. And you know what the guy responded? He's an older man or whatever. He looked at me, he smiled, he said, exaltation in life or elevation of status in life comes from God. Okay, so it is God. So then I asked him, I said, so are you saying that all these people in Nigeria who are exalted and elevated have been elevated there by God? And I said, do you know that if things are going very well in Nigeria, somebody like you should not be selling cola nuts. You can be doing something better with your life. And are you not aware of the way people, poor people or ordinary people in Nigeria are treated by these people that God exalted or God elevated? So you're comfortable with that. So I told him that if that is the kind of elevation that God gives people so that they will be elevated so that they come and trample upon the poor like a pair of sandals, I said, I don't want it. I don't want God's elevation in that respect. If God's elevation for my life is I just go up there, I take care of myself, and then I trample upon the poor like a pair of sandals. The place was quiet. Okay, when I said that. So I use this ordinary conversation about just ordinary color nut. But you can see this question of God coming in. 1, 2, 3. You get in conversation with people. This was in Jaws. Okay. 1, 2, 3, you engage with people in conversation. and then this issue of God. So it's almost like, mhm, yeah.
Yeah, I want us to kind of, sorry for interjecting, but I really want us to explore a little bit or explore further this issue of religion, especially its relationship or the intersection with politics in Nigeria. I know you train as a sociologist from your undergraduate to graduate and doctoral levels, but you appear to have a keen interest in the study of religion, and especially even in this conversation, you have made reference to religion severally. So I want us to talk, or I want you to talk a little bit about what role does religion as a social construct play in Nigeria's politics?
Oh, there's quite a lot that they do. um, there's quite a lot. Um, okay,
Is it
I
is
don't have the time.
religion, or
Yeah.
maybe to limit the question, I would say, is religion, given the intricate nature of the Nigerian society and the way people are so religious in Nigeria. So the question is religion the major determinant of social and political change in Nigeria?
Well, definitely the way things are in Nigeria, religion can play a very important role in terms of bringing about change in Nigeria. But I do not believe that the way the majority of people are using religion is the type that will bring about change. And the reason why I'm saying this is simply because I'm not saying this out of disrespect for Nigerians or anything like that, but I am a comparative historical sociologist. So we can look at what happened in other parts of the world and see how religion has been used. Definitely, religion can be used to bring about transformation, positive transformation. But in the way things are in Nigeria, let me give you some examples. Um, there's a way in Nigeria, religion is used to dehumanize people. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes when I read articles on WhatsApp or in newspapers in Nigeria and they quote some Muslim or Christian leaders, I feel very embarrassed about it because the textual analysis of the wordings or the tone or the intention or the worldview of the person who makes the religious leader who makes those statements clearly indicate to you that as far as that person is concerned, there are no other people in Nigeria that matter except people who belong to his religion, either Islam or Christianity. That's it. Okay. So if people are thinking this way, then you begin to wonder because remember that one of the things that religion is supposed to do is it is supposed to sublimate some of those appetitive desires, some of these instinctual desires in us. In other words, all human beings have insatiable desires, and these insatiable desires can lead us into conflict because there's no limit to what I need or what I want or whatever. So you have the same need, other person has the same need. So chances are that we end up going to clash with each other because we're competing for the same scarce resources and things like that. But religion is supposed to help us in sublimating some of these instinctual desires so that when they are tamed, then we become more cultivated as human beings and we can relate to each other in the sense that I can recognize the humanity of somebody who is not related to me, who is not from my ethnic group, who is not from my race, who is not from the same religious group with me or the same religion with me. Okay. But so this is an important role that religion can play. In other words, religion can help me see the humanity of another person. But when in our churches and our mosque, the language we use, instead of taming us or sublimating this whatever, becomes really something that mobilizes these instinctual desires to make us feel like we are the only people that are human. So if I am a Christian, then any other person doesn't matter. Okay, they are just some kind of somebody at the periphery, okay, of the society because they are not Christian, they are not saved. And then the Muslims will say the same thing, right? That if somebody is not a Muslim, he's just an infidel or something like that, or something like that. Christian will say the person is living in darkness or whatever. Okay. So in a civilized society, my my basis of interaction, and having been in the United States for quite some time, I don't interact with people on the basis of, oh, because I'm a Christian and this person is not a Christian, so they are less, they are living in darkness or whatever. I don't operate with that kind of logic or something like that. But in Nigeria, you have that kind of way of thinking. So there was a time we had an interaction with somebody, and I know the kind of biases, and I wanted to create a conversation, and he asked me, oh, where are you from or whatever, and I told him I told him what my name was. I told him I was from Bauchi State, and I told him that I was an infidel. And then he felt embarrassed the fact that I introduced myself that way. But the reason is simply because I want people in Nigeria to understand that the basis of our interaction, if we are going to build a nation, it's not that there are no religious differences, but if you use that religious framework the way it is, then Nigeria is never going to be one nation where we respect truly each other. It's like you interact with somebody who is from another religion, you shake hands, you smile, you say good things, but the moment the person really leaves, you either say the person is an infidel or the person is living in darkness or he's lost or something like that, okay? And these are not really complimentary terms. These are not complimentary terms when people really use them. So that's one way to think about how religion can be used or is being used to kind of demonize other people. But the other thing is, if you check the scriptures, you find out that it is all based on interpretation. And I'm saying this, I have been teaching religion for quite some time. There's nobody who is honest, who is going to look at the Bible and look at the Holy Quran, Holy Bible or Holy Quran and just say that there's nothing that talks about violence there. There are quite a lot of things that talk about violence. Phyllis Tribble wrote a book called, I think the title of her book is Text of Terror. Okay, so she's talking about the Bible. There are certain books in the Bible, there are certain texts in the Bible that are called texts of terror, because you get these people who are just kind of, genocide was committed, literally. Okay, so there are texts of terror, okay, and especially on women sometimes, okay. So, but Nigerians don't have the courage. Most Nigerians, I would say, don't have the courage to confront this, because if you say that there are verses in the Holy Quran or the Holy Bible, there are verses that talk about good things, how to treat war, whatever, but there are also verses that can be used to dehumanize other human beings in both the Bible and the Holy Quran. So the question here becomes, how do you interpret the Bible? It's so simplistic when I hear people say the Holy Bible or the Holy Quran are word of God or whatever. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. You still have to interpret it. And anybody who's familiar with the literature on hermeneutics knows that people bring a lot of baggage when they do the interpretation. Okay, they don't interpret the same way. Let me give one example. I've been giving a lot of examples from Christianity. Let me give one example from Islam. I was watching one documentary here in the United States, and somebody made this point. You know that when Prophet Muhammad left Mecca to Medina, the revelation he got in Medina were longer than the ones in Mecca. And then the ones in Mecca, the ones in Medina are also more detailed, because a society, an ummah, there was an ummah there and a Muslim community or society that was being created. Okay, so this guy, this scholar here in the United States, who is an Islamic scholar, argues that some people argue that, well, that shows that even the revelation that was received was responsive to differences in context. Okay, so the context in Medina was different from the context in Mecca. And for that reason, the messages were different. They were longer in Mecca and in Medina and more detailed. So the logic the guy is trying to draw from that is that the scriptures need to be reinterpreted depending on context over time. In other words, the context we are in now is different from the past context. And this applies to both Christianity and Islam. Okay. So these are complicated issues, and some people would not like to engage in this kind of conversation in Nigeria. But I truly believe that the mindset of the person in the 21st century today is not the assumptions of the mindset of the person in the 21st century. It's not the same thing as the mindset of the person who existed 1,000 years ago. The two may be honest that they are interpreting the scriptures, but if I was born 1,000 years ago, I wouldn't be thinking, I wouldn't be talking the way I'm talking now. Okay, because it's a totally different world. Okay, so the idea that simply because the Holy Quran and the Holy Bible have been in existence or whatever, and so we all interpret it the same way, is so simplistic. Our mindset, our mindset. But then to come back to Christianity, you get a lot of people who are Christians guided by the Holy Spirit, but they read the same book in the Bible, the same verse, but they come up with diametrically opposed interpretation. It shows you that there are other factors apart from just the book that is influencing how people interpret scriptures. Okay, so again, so religion is like a worldview. You cannot underestimate it in terms of how it can shape the way. It's like a lens through which people see society. And I always tell people that you cannot ignore it. Okay, and religion raise fundamental questions that science cannot answer in many cases. There are things that science can,
Go ahead, please.
There are things that science can clarify, but there are things that science cannot. And religion is always going to be part of society.
Well, the follow-up question is, what are the dangers of the politicization of religion, especially in the Nigerian society?
Oh, let me give you one example from an article that I wrote, which I published, and I was so disturbed. There's one Nigerian preacher, minister, who said that he didn't see any basis on which a member of his congregation can be richer than him. Okay. And what was his justification? He said, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, he rode on a donkey, on a colt, but the disciples walk on their feet. So there's seniority there. Okay. So there's seniority there. So I remember when I read this, I went to the office that day, and then I felt like I had quarreled with somebody. And when I finished teaching, I came and sat down in my office. I said, I wasn't feeling this way, but why was it that I started feeling kind of like I was in bad mood or something like that? So I regressed back. I started checking myself step by step. And then I came and realized that it was this statement that I read in the book written by this Nigerian minister saying that he didn't see any basis on which a member of his congregation can be richer than him. So this is a way religion is politicized, but it is politicized to facilitate capitalist accumulation, right? It is used to justify capitalist accumulation. The other way it is politicized is in the area of citizenship, where in some states in Nigeria, especially in the northern states, there are some states where the Muslims feel they are treated like second-class citizens because either they are a minority or something like that. And then there are some states where Christians are treated as if they are refugees. I can give you an example from Bauchi State, for instance. When I went to conduct some training workshop on justice, different approaches to justice, this was in 2019. People were initially complaining, the Christians were initially complaining about how they were excluded or something like that. Although before we finished, they started admitting that even within their own denomination, there was injustice. So it was not like injustice by the dominant group or something like that. So the point I'm trying to make here is just that literally religion is being used as a labor market strategy in Nigeria. What do I mean by a labor market strategy? A labor market strategy simply means if I'm looking for a job and I'm a Christian in a predominantly Christian state, then I use my Christian religion to kind of eliminate or to marginalize the other person. And then if somebody is a Muslim and in a predominantly Muslim state is looking for a position, they would use religious arguments or something, sentiment or something like that to eliminate the Christian or something like that. This is happening in Nigeria. Let's be frank about it, okay? If you really want to build a just and fair society, you don't do that. But what I also try to explain is that when you really look at it, is that whether in the predominantly Christian state or the predominantly Muslim state, you're going to find out that the poor still suffer. which means that religion is just used as a labor market strategy in the sense that the people who are using it do not really mean really serious. So if you go to Bauchi State, like Christians were complaining, but you go to Bauchi State, you get ordinary Muslims that are just living in wretched poverty. It doesn't mean that when the elites use religion, they are using it in the interest of the masses or something like that. It's just like a political strategy or labor market strategy. Similarly, when you go to Christian states, okay, so you go to Plateau State, for instance. If you go to Plateau State, which is a predominantly Christian state, you are not going to find out that ordinary people in Plateau who are Christians feel like they are being taken care of or something like that. Okay, so we have this problem, and we have to be honest about it. People just use like they create a concentric circle. So a circle, a small circle inside, another circle around it, another circle around it. So the people of a particular religion see themselves in the middle, and then all other people who belong to other religion are seen as people remaining outside. And the reason why I think this is really very, very important, Europe had to struggle with this. Many people did not understand the basis of secularization or secular state or whatever. But part of the reason in Europe was just that they fought so many wars on religious basis. And at some point, people realized that this is not going to take us anywhere because this war is not going to end. So you find like people of different religion fighting, and then within each religion there are also some sects that are fighting each other or something like that. So it was because of this insecurity and pressure that led them to start thinking, okay, how can we move beyond that? And then people talk about secularization or the secular state, which means create a society where you are free to practice your religion, okay, but religion should not be used to colonize the state, okay. And this is something very important. Another way religion is politicized is through gender. Okay. I'm really sorry to say this, but women have been kept down so much low just because of religious reasons. People use religion to justify that. Okay. And it's just based on the kind of like somebody will interpret the scripture this way and say a woman is supposed to be this, a woman is supposed to be that, or whatever. But as I said much earlier, we human beings in our natural form are born with selfishness. Okay, we have insatiable desires. We have these instinctual desires. One of the most important functions of religion, apart from salvation or life after death or anything, is to tame this raw human being with insatiable desires or whatever, to sublimate those excesses, okay, so that he or she can become cultivated. But what we are having in Nigeria, and not only Nigeria, in other societies as well, is a situation where religion is used to desublimate. Desublimate means to really allow these instinctual desires, okay, this raw, crude desire to dominate others, which St. Augustine called libido dominandi. Libido dominandi simply means this libido to dominate, the lust to conquer and dominate. You see it in a lot of places. They do not understand that one of the major contribution of religion is to create a sense of liberation in the individual. A sense of liberation, to feel liberated, simply means I don't have to be the center of attention, but I can feel comfortable with that. Okay? So if I am in Nigeria, I'm going to serve in certain role or capacity, I don't have to feel like everything has to revolve around me. The important thing is to get things done or whatever. And I feel comfortable about that. So there's a sense of liberation from within. But if you are infused with this spirit of libido dominandi, the lust to conquer or to dominate, oh my God, you see it a lot in the Nigerian public square. Everybody wants to be this, and before you know what is happening, this and that. So religion is politicized in the area of gender. It is politicized in the area of positions, the way positions are allocated, and things like that.
A follow-up question. I know this may be a little bit broad, but I want you to just say something about this. You don't have to go in details. It can be broad, but just to ask that Generally speaking, or broadly speaking, will you say that Nigeria's major problem is religious, regional, ethnic, or a combination of these factors?
It is all. All of them are really very important, but if you ask me my own personal opinion, I go back to the logic of reasoning of Plato and okay, let me use this time around Plato, Aristotle, and Sigmund Freud. I know some people will say these are all Western scholars or something like that, but as I mentioned much earlier, that I don't have problem with any idea that is really very useful. So yes, religion can be there. Religion can be used for good and bad. So, and then apart from religion, you talk about regionalism, right? This and that, or whatever. I think for me, the problem of Nigeria, if you really think about it, initially you might say it's regional, different regions. But when you really look at it, in social sciences, there's something called analysis of variance called ANOVA. And when you do analysis of variance or ANOVA analysis, there's something we call within group variation and between group variation. Okay, within group variation and between group variation. So when you really look at that, you find out that we tend to compare, because in Nigeria, we tend to focus on regional inequalities. We ignore the inequality within regions. And this is where justice becomes an important concern. So, for instance, when I was in Nigeria, was it in 2018? I made a presentation in Abuja, and one point I made during, it was at the Army Resource Center about something related to federalism or something like that. And I said, for instance, that I don't have any objection about, in principle, about people saying that something should be done about the present distribution of power between the regions, or between the regions and the federal government, or the states and the federal government. I say I don't have, in principle, I don't have objection about objection against that, because as societies change, they would have to make some adjustment. But here is the point that I emphasize. I said, given what I saw in Nigeria, if they do not address the question of justice, even if every family in Nigeria gets its own state or local government, if there is no justice that is emphasized in the family, in that family or in that state, even if every family gets its own state or local government, there will be a lot of fighting. And right now, there are many families in Nigeria that have had a lot of internal squabbles and things like that, serious disagreement, just because of competition over scarce resources. Okay, so the point I'm just trying to make here is that initially you might say the reason why all these things you mentioned are the real problems, but then when you go within each region, like this thing that is happening in Zamfara, it is not caused by a Yoruba person or an Igbo person or something like that. No, this is happening in the north. Okay, so it shows you that forget about even the regional differences. Let's look within the region and see what is the bottom of this problem. So, and this is where Plato becomes relevant again. What is happening in the north, as I have mentioned much earlier, is a situation where people have allowed their appetitive desires to take over their reason and their soul. And what that simply means, in many cases, in the case of, say, northern Nigeria, is just that there has not been any concerted effort with a sense of urgency to get the poor out of poverty in northern Nigeria. The typical average president, anybody president, is just that you do something here and there, and the little they do, they make it look like it's like they're doing something out of their own pocket to the masses, not knowing that this is their public responsibility. What I mean by public responsibility is that if I am the governor of the state and we do something to a particular community, it's not my money. This is the money of the people. Okay, yeah. So I don't think there was any sense of urgency. Maybe the closest we came to that was under when PRP under Malam Aminu Kano was talking always. At least when Malam Aminu Kano was alive, the agenda for the poor was always there on the table or something like that. But nobody was caring anything. Nobody cared for anything about that. The elites were just interested in keeping the system the way it is. Let's be frank about it. They kept it the way it is. If they were really very honest that they wanted to transform Nigeria, I think there are people in Nigeria who would have cooperated with that. There are people I truly believe who are willing to commit themselves to that. But there are also people outside Nigeria, organizations that would be willing to help Northern Nigeria make this kind of progress, because there's something beautiful about seeing ordinary people, irrespective of whether you come from the same religion or not, whether the same ethnic group or not, the same country or not, to see them make progress in life. Okay, but there was no any desire for that. The main reason is not something primarily, is not something that you have to go outside the region. It's inside the individual. If within myself I'm a leader and I am able to sublimate everything about myself and have this vision that the dignity of the human being, every human being, irrespective of religion differences, ethnic differences, has to be taken seriously and all needs to be done. And my goal is not to just stay in power or make money or maintain this connection or whatever, but the goal, the main goal is to improve the situation of the masses. Then that would be a difference. But so what I'm trying to say is that the whole thing starts from the way things are going on within the individual. And then we go to Aristotle. Aristotle made this very important observation. He said you should always go for the mean. Don't go for excess and don't go for deficiency. Excess is when you do things beyond whatever. And then deficiency, I would say that most Nigerian elites have gone either to excess, excess or deficiency. They are deficient in the way they care about the masses, but they are excessive in the way they want to accumulate power for themselves. So moderation is very important. Okay, if elites want power or whatever, there's a sense of moderation. But sometimes in Nigeria, there's no sense of that moderation. People are willing to just go to any level. So, and then to go back to what I said about Sigmund Freud, is just that in this instinctual desires and the idea that needs to be sublimated. Okay, if you don't have some values, some ethical and moral values rooted in the dignity of the individual that inspire our leaders and inspire their commitment, which would then sublimate any desire for egocentrism or things like that, then we're not going to be able to make any progress in that respect. One way Nigeria can move, especially northern Nigeria, for instance, can move forward, or Nigeria can move forward, is for a leader in Nigeria to mobilize the masses, as I said earlier. Okay. And what I mean by mobilizing the masses is that it is not, because if any leader in Nigeria is trying to bring about transformation, if that transformation is going to shake up the hierarchy of the system so that the masses can also have a level playing field or something like that, you can be rest assured that there are many elites or even middle class people who will resist that, because they will feel now they will just be like anybody. They used to feel that they're special because of this and that. But now with the leveling of the field, all these children from maybe ordinary backgrounds are going to move up or something like that. So people are going to resist that. But if the leader has been able to sell this idea to the masses very carefully, it's not like he's organizing a revolution or she's organizing a revolution or something like that. But the masses can understand that and know that this is a fight for their future, and they can stand with him or her in position of power and just say, we know that you are committed to us and you are not doing this for yourself, but you are just doing this. This can happen. And when the elites or the middle classes who are resisting change realize that this is a different struggle because the masses are really, really supporting this person, they would have to sit down on the table. And this is what I mean much earlier, that when you look at how the states change or politics change or democracy change in Europe, it changed simply because of this balance of power. Ryan Lieber really talk about it. Without balance of power, there's going to be no justice or whatever, because the elites, the powerful, can always get their way. So, but the problem we have is that the power in Nigeria is lopsided. Okay, the elites are there, but the masses, as we said much earlier, they are concerned about predestination. If God predestined that you're going to do something, it doesn't matter. it's going to happen. So you don't have to do anything really about it.
I want to try to wrap up by just talking about one more area that I know you are also passionate about, which is education.
Yeah.
Uh, so because you believe that education is the bedrock for transformation, especially in
Mm,
Nigeria. And I just want to ask two questions here. I will just ask the two questions and allow you to respond. The first
mm.
question is what type of education are we talking about, or what type of education do Nigerians need to have for this vision of transformation? And the follow-up question is getting an education in Nigeria is difficult because of many socio-economic factors. Some of them you have talked about in this the course of this interview. So, how can Nigerian government make education more accessible to the common man?
Okay. This is definitely something that I'm very interested in. So, what type of education do we really need? Before I talk about Paulo Freire, whose work has significantly influenced me, he's a Brazilian scholar. He wrote a book. His first book, which became very popular and still a classic, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So I'll talk about some insights from that. But more importantly now, but to begin with, I would like to borrow the ideas or use the ideas of Jürgen Habermas, who is a German scholar. Um, he wrote a book called Knowledge and Human Interest. And in this book, Knowledge and Human Interest, he said there's no any pursuit of knowledge that is just neutral. All pursuit of knowledge are guided by certain human interests. And he identifies, three different types of human interests. Now, some people can identify more, but at least he identified three. One is called prediction and control. So prediction and control is one of the purposes or one of the human interests of acquiring knowledge. And what that simply means is that the goal of acquiring knowledge is to be able to predict, to understand the world, to be able to predict it and control it. This is particularly in the sciences, right? So, but it is happening even in the social sciences. In other words, when you are able to predict human behavior, okay, in whatever area, or when you are able to predict something in society, you will be able to control it by and large. We hope so. We hope you will be able to do that. The only question is, what is the motivation of that person who is doing the prediction and control? Okay, because I can predict something about you or about anybody, but if my goal in predicting your behavior is to enable me to control you in my own interest, then that becomes domination. It becomes libido dominandi rather than okay. So, and what this simply means is that it is possible that our educational system could be designed in such a way that we're providing good education, but essentially what we're doing is because we are teaching people to become technical people, but there's no any moral and ethical commitment to that. So they have the knowledge and then they just use it to empower themselves and dominate others. I think this is something very common in Nigeria as it is in other societies. But then the second type of education that he talks about is the kind of education that is motivated by a certain human interest called um, hermeneutical interest. Okay, hermeneutical interest here, cultural hermeneutic interests. What does that mean? The goal here is to increase cross-cultural understanding. In other words, some people can, and this is particularly the case in humanities, right? In humanities, we try to teach people to learn a lot so that I may not be a Hausa person, a Fulani person. I'm not a Yoruba or Igbo person. I'm not a thief or whatever ethnic group. But the idea is that through education, we can create this cross-cultural hermeneutic understanding. In other words, I can understand something about somebody's culture and appreciate it. So we build bridges. So one goal of education is to be able to build bridges across cultures. This building of bridges, not just across cultures, but across classes or whatever, or even gender, for instance. Okay, so I don't have to be a woman in order to appreciate the struggles of a woman or something like that. So, but the idea here is just to be able to build a society, use our education to build cross-cultural understanding, hermeneutical understanding, and at the in its most extreme or uh, highest expression, this can this is aimed at creating a sense of shared humanity. And what I mean by that is we don't have to be persons of the same race or nationality, but we can still appreciate, we can have some appreciation of each other. Okay. So I'm not a Chinese person, but I can read Confucius and draw some ideas from something that Confucius really wrote. I'm not a person from Latin America, but I can read something written by uh, scholars in Brazil, like Paulo Freire, and still appreciate something that they have written. Okay, so cross-cultural understanding, or I can read something in the history of Islam and appreciate something about that. So Buddhism or Judaism and things like that. Okay, so the third type of education or human interest is critical. Okay, so the critical human interest that shapes education is concerned about liberation, emancipation, and liberation of oppressed people. In other words, the goal of this kind of education is to educate people so that they can understand what it means to be emancipated or to be liberated, which is a process, and how do you get there? Okay, so some would argue that if education is going to be useful in any country, there has to be a balance between this. The prediction and control, which is in the sciences, is very, very important. But the question, as I said here, the warning there is that don't assume that just merely teaching science and being successful in teaching science is going to be a source of liberation in the world. Because when you look at Western societies, those people who wrote during like Auguste Comte, during the when the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment was taking place, if they will resurrect today, they will be very disappointed because they thought at that time that the main reason why people are suffering is because of lack of knowledge, because of lack of technology. But once we get this, production is going to be so much and nobody will be hungry. Amazingly, how many years after the Industrial Revolution, we still have people who are hungry, which shows you that simply relying on science, just assuming that science in and of itself will just solve the problem, is not there. You have to combine science with certain other moral and ethical commitment in order to use it in an appropriate way for the benefit of all humanity. Okay. So, and then the hermeneutical is very, very important. I think one of the problems I have in Nigerian education is just how some people, even when they are educated, when they talk, you just wonder, how can this person be highly educated, but they don't seem to understand our shared humanity or whatever? It's like, I am from this ethnic group or from this religion, and that's it. I don't see anything more than that, or something like that. Okay. Or that they are African or something like that. I have some serious problem about that. True education should help us build this kind of cross-cultural hermeneutical understanding. And then the question of emancipation and liberation. This is very, very important. There's no human society that did not need liberation and emancipation. Okay? Whether you are talking about Saudi Arabia during the Jahiliyyah period, or you're talking about ancient Greece, you're talking about Rome, okay? Rome during the Republic and Empire, or during the colonial period, or whatever. Or today, in the kind of world we're living where human beings have become commodities or something like that, okay? People need liberation, emancipation, okay? So this should be an integral part of education. But I was very shocked when I was told that they eliminated history in Nigerian education or something like that. I don't know whether it was at the secondary school level or I was so shocked about it. So it seems to me like in Nigerian public education, there's very little, there's less concern about this emphasis on producing a certain, an individual with certain moral and ethical cultivation. This is to me very, very important. It is true people can get all sorts of knowledge, okay? But we are not sure how we are going to use that knowledge. In other words, two people with the same knowledge can use it differently depending on the moral compass they are using. The moral compass will shape how they decide to use that education. And I think this is something that is very, very important to me. Okay, so that kind of balance. I'm not against science education or whatever, but any education that is not going to cultivate the individual to develop certain moral and ethical capacity to value the human dignity of all, irrespective of people's religion, ethnicity, gender, or whatever, I think there's a problem there because we will always just be fighting among ourselves. And then with regard to how we can make education available to accessible to people, I think this is something that is very, very important. There's difference between availability and access. And I told you much earlier at the beginning is that if it were not because the federal government of Nigeria subsidized my education, because at that time, university education was subsidized. We didn't pay tuition. What we paid was not really tuition. And then the money we were paying to eat in the dining center, it was less than the true value of the meal we were eating, but it was all subsidized. Okay. So, but the irony there is, and I feel terrible to talk about this because the money that was used or invested to educate me or and many others was money that should have been available, is available, or should be available to every Nigerian citizen, whether she lives in the rural, a woman lives in the rural area, or she's living in the city selling something by the side of the street. As a Nigerian citizen, she's equally entitled to have access to that money because it's public money, right? But many of these women were denied access to healthy drinking water, little capital for this, no good roads, whatever, because they wanted to educate us in the university, right? And the understanding was that when we get educated, we're now going to come and contribute to nation building and national development. And then the benefit, okay, of all that will benefit all these ordinary people. But okay, see, in my case now, I am spending a good part of my time outside Nigeria, which means it's a loss for Nigeria. Okay, but then secondly, even if I want to go back to Nigeria, some people would not like to have me back there. Okay, I know the way the system really works. Okay, so like you want to go, it's not like you go there because it's not like you go there because you want to you go there because you want to be a king or anything like that. But even if you want to serve, somebody is more concerned about his interests or whatever. So you see how Nigeria is losing. I'm not the only person. There are many Nigerians who are educated the same way as I was, but they left. It's a loss. Actually, I teach economics of development, and I know that this is a loss. Okay, but it's a kind of brain drain. But here is a kind of brain drain that is more dangerous. So you get these people who are educated with people's money in Nigeria, like us, but who are working in Nigeria. But when they assume their position of responsibility in the Nigerian government, instead of using the position to empower the masses to help them develop, they use the position to double down on the masses because the masses were denied in the first place something in order to educate them, with the understanding that when they finish, they will come and use their educational position to help the masses. But then now they come and have the position, but instead of helping the masses, they're using it to just help themselves and their family members or something like that. Okay, so all these are concerns that some people raise, and so one of the things that came out of this is this approach to education that is called neoliberal. Okay, the neoliberal approach to education says we will privatize education. Everybody must pay his or her way. Because if people don't pay something for something, they're not going to value it. It's just like cheap, you know. But if you're paying it, either you have to take a loan or something like that. So you'll take it more seriously because this is money that is coming out of your wallet or something like that. So anyway, after the 1980s and subsequently with the with the dissemination of neoliberal ideology through the World Bank, the IMF, and then later by the advanced nations, everything was considered to be more efficient if it is administered through the market or something like that. Okay. So although we have federal government universities and they are still not kind of private universities, they are not private universities, but at least they pay some tuition, right? And when you look at the tuition, when I was in Nigeria, when I served in Nnamdi Azikiwe University, I found out that even though by international standard you will think the money people pay as tuition is small, but many families struggle to pay for that money, and then to pay for the feeding and the accommodation of the student or something like that. So how can we get around that? Well, the way we can get around that is, one way you can do that, of course, if people are all doing very well or whatever, then they can pay their way. But because they are doing very well economically, it wouldn't be an issue. But I don't think even in the United States we can say this is the case, because even in the United States we face this problem of access to education being too expensive for some people. So, but the whole issue has to be rooted in the vision of development of that country. And let me give you some examples. There are countries who believe that healthcare should be privatized. In other words, there should be no universal healthcare policy in a country where people can get free medical treatment if they are citizens of that particular country. Okay? Some people think that, but there are some people who think that, well, we love capitalism, we love the market, but we have to regulate it. We have to discipline the market using our values, okay? Which is another part of the conversation that is missing for those people who think the moment somebody critique capitalism, he must be socialist or he must be communist or something like that. No, it's about the balance, okay? So here are people like Switzerland, or even Britain. Britain is a classic capitalist country, but they have universal healthcare, okay? The national healthcare policy, which allows every British person to be treated freely. They don't have to worry about that. So, so in this case, even though there are all these propaganda or information disseminated about the need to privatize something, if you don't privatize it, if people do not pay for it, they're not going to value it because they take it for granted. It's just free. They will just waste it. But there's a way we can do something about that if we're really very serious, to still make education, just like Britain made healthcare to be free to all citizens, even though it is a capitalist country. Nigeria can decide to still say that, given our level of development, if education is just left to be based on income or something like that, there are many children that would not be able to get a good education. And to be frank with you, what we see in Nigeria today is a polarization between the rich and the poor in terms of access to education. Now, this can be free market, but it is going to create problems for us in the future, because you are going to have a large number of people at the bottom of the society who are frustrated. And then you have a small group of people, elite, who are doing very well because of their education at the top. It's not going to lead to peace. That's what Paul Samuelson was saying when he quoted Albert Einstein, that don't believe something because it's elegantly stated. So don't say, well, it's free market or whatever. It sounds nice, okay? But if you do that, and then you have a society where there are winners and losers, and there's a pattern to that. Some small group of people are winning and then others are losing. You can use all sorts of economic arguments to justify that. But believe me, you're going to run into trouble in the future, because this is exactly what is happening with all the bandits and everything in the North. Some people must have used elegant arguments along religious and traditional reasoning argument about the need not to change things in the North or this and that. Okay, fine, they got what they wanted, but look at where we are today. Okay, where this process. So similarly, I think the best thing is to come up with a policy that will say that we, as a society, we are going to be committed to providing this education relatively free. Of course, there are people who make money through education. They see it as an industry, so they wouldn't want that because they feel you are stopping them from making, just like electricity in Nigeria. There are many people who will pray that the Nigerian government or whatever is never able to efficiently provide electricity in the country, because then there will be no need for business of generators, buying generators or selling them, because electricity just becomes just normal. You don't have to worry about an alternative arrangement or something like that. So similarly, in education, this will be the case. But for this to happen, it requires a certain level of commitment at several levels. Okay. In order for us to improve education, we have to take care of the family really very well, because no talk about education will be taken seriously if you don't address what is happening in the family. The family is the place where the child initially starts to learn. And if you don't, if there's some disruption, the family is so disorganized or whatever, don't expect that it's going to really help the child. It will be too late by the time the child goes to school or whatever. Okay, so we have to do something about the family to make sure that the family is really stable and things like that. And then we have to teach our people to cultivate this need for fairness. Okay, and what I mean by fairness is I shouldn't feel like my status is diminished if my child goes to school with somebody's child who is not as educated as me. You understand what I mean? Like, simply because I am a professor and then my children should only go to school with children of professors or whatever. No. So just fairness, just understand that it's about opportunity. If we all understand that, then we'll be able to support this kind of educational system that is about fair distribution. Okay. And then the other thing is, those people who get educated through this way must be brought up or be disciplined to cultivate this idea that there's a social mortgage on their education. What I mean by social mortgage is that because the society is investing in their education, when they get their education, they shouldn't see it as just something they privately own, but they have a social responsibility. There's a social responsibility, sorry, that is associated with the acquisition of that education, which is to use it to benefit the common person, or to help the common good. And the common good here is a concept that is rooted in Catholic social teaching, which I find really very, very important, because if everybody is just trying to uh, pursue his or her narrow selfish interests, not caring about the fact that if the society is destroyed, or if there's instability like we are now experiencing with banditry and things like that, nobody among us is going to be happy. Nobody among us is going to feel safe. So the common good simply means, in order for me to thrive, in order for the other person to thrive, we need to be sure that we create a community, a society, an environment that enables all of us to really thrive. Okay, so there's quite a lot of transformation that would um, have to take place. But my fear is just that there are many Nigerian elites who just feel what makes them distinctive is that their children have been able to receive good education, which is superior to that of the ordinary people, and that's what makes them special. And I feel sorry for that way of thinking, because I wish they will reach a certain level of cultivation where, as Mala Aminu kind of said, we provide a kind of education that would enable the son of nobody to become somebody. Okay, yeah. So thank you very much.
Wow, it's been a mind-boggling interaction. I mean, we covered a lot of things, and
Yeah.
you were so eloquent in talking about most of these issues. I cannot thank you enough. So thank you so
Yeah.
much, Professor Zalanga, for making
Yeah.
time out of
Yeah.
your busy schedules to be part of this. I believe it was educative and informative and enlightening to anyone who cared to listen. Once again, thank you so much. And for
Thank
all
you.
of you that listen and followed, thank you so much for all your contributions. Do you have any final words?
Well, my final word is just that if the listener is in Nigeria, I just want to say that I appreciate what Nigeria. I mentioned how much was invested in my education. So I still owe Nigerians something, because their money was used to educate me. And my heart and my soul still is with those, especially at the bottom of the society, who I know that they deserve better, but they are not there. And I would say that let's continue to work together. Let's continue to build bridges across our ethnic, religious differences, regional differences, gender differences, so that we can build a nation where everybody can thrive and flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all of you once again. Thank you so much. Until I come your way next time with another episode of the interview. Bye for now.
Okay. Okay, bye then. Thank you.